The Doors of Stone, Part 2. I stood in solitude, listening to the sounds of my breaths bouncing around the inside of my helmet. It was time to proceed. I found the circular markings that he had described very easily. They were the only ones on the doors, making them stand out from the other nonsensical patterns. I reached up, the very edges of my gloved fingertips brushing the circles. I could just barely get my hand up enough to press down on it. The cavern filled with the clicking sound of gears turning rapidly. I watched as the circles spun in place, realigning themselves to blend in with the other whirls and spirals. A resonating boom sounded as the circles came to a halt and the doors began to part. They came towards me, slowly, the heavy stone dredging up mounds of snow on either side. The doors groaned deeply on their hinges as they moved, their weight carrying them out. I stepped back enough for them to open without accidentally getting caught in their path, and suddenly, they stopped. Their hinges creaked tiredly, as if crying out from not being used in many, many years. I blinked, using my hand to wipe the fog that had settled on the outside of my visor so I could see what lay ahead of me. Beyond the doors, I saw nothing, just an expanse of blackness that leached out into the silvery chamber I stood in. If I stared too long, I could swear I saw tendrils of thick, black smoke snaking across the floor of the cavern, racing towards my boots. But as soon as I blinked, the vision would pass, and I was left staring into the abysmal darkness in front of me.
Approximate distance to Fauna, 16 kilometers northwest,
exclaimed the automated voice. I jumped, the notification catching me off guard. I knew if I stood there shaking, I would never make any progress. I might as well call to the service and have them haul me back up, but that would be a waste. I would never forgive myself for not even trying. Before I could change my mind, I trudged forward, my boots crunching purposefully through the snow into whatever lay beyond. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but a network of buildings and tunnels wasn't something I had considered, especially since it was intact and well-preserved for the most part. As I traveled farther and farther away from the doorway, my headlamp further illuminated the skeletal remains of the complex city. It was carved from the same pale, glistening stone as the doors, and was just as detailed in its architecture. The city was composed of high arches and squared roofs, reaching into the cavernous ceiling. It was maze-like and cramped, the towering walls boxing me in between them, forcing me to follow their wide paths. The fitting of the blocks was seamless, each stone fitting precisely in place. Each brick was cut with an incredible amount of precision, the edges all straight and clean. The buildings were spaced tightly, packed next to each other without many gaps. All had double doors in the same arched style of the city doors, though smooth, without all the intricate engravings. Slabs of stone propped up on table-like structures outside various buildings were carved with a runic script, the style different than the markings on the city doors. I took a photo with my visor cam, adding a note that the runes were likely the written language of the inhabitants. Pillars supported a net-like structure of arches high above the rooftops, the pillars themselves detailed in the same swirling patterns of the doors to the city. I marveled at the masterpiece that lay buried beneath thousands of meters of earth. I wondered just what happened to those who created it. I walked for about an hour, following the path deep into the city. The farther in I ventured, the more damage the buildings had undergone. Significantly more buildings were falling apart, the patterns of destruction resembling the aftermath of an attack rather than the passage of time. I made my way past building after building, pausing as my headlamp ghosted over a particular series of structures. I'd nearly missed it amongst the other bent and broken constructs. Rough chunks of loose stone and fine dust littered the area, the walls snaked with wide cracks. Every few steps I had to maneuver around a section of dislodged bricks bigger than I was. On one side of me was a set of buildings, possibly residences. They all bore the signs of surviving a massive impact with varying degrees of success. One was completely demolished, a few collapsing at one side or another, though carved across them was a deep groove, like something huge had slashed across the street, destroying everything in its path. I snapped a few photos with my visor camera before carefully moving on.
Approximate distance to Fauna, 7 kilometers north.
I yelped at the sound of the notification. Though it continued to startle me, I didn't want to disable them for fear of being uninformed. Whatever was out there was moving fast, and it was coming closer. I had to hurry up and get out as soon as possible. I took a step and was knocked to the ground as the earth around me began to shake. A low, vibrating rumble filled the air. The sound, more of a sensation than something I could hear. It made my teeth clench and my chest ache. My vision grew obscured as my visor monitor picked up interference, blocking my line of sight with mix-matched pixels of green, gray, and white. Dust and small stones got dislodged, clattering off the side of my helmet as they fell. As quickly as it began, it ended, and I was left leaning against a wall, panting. I wiped the excess grit off my visor as the display screen cleared up, just as another notification came up.
Approximate distance to Fauna, 5 kilometers north.
It was too close, and I was too far in. I needed out now. Whatever it was, it had caused the vibration and the interference. I had no idea what else it was capable of, and I wasn't willing to find out. That was not my job as a cartographer. Deeming my own mission a success, I set my mapping software into reverse mode. It would now show me the path I took in reverse order, making it easier for me to find my way out. I turned my back on the city, letting the map I'd created lead me out the way I came in. I picked up my pace, suddenly finding a burst of energy within me. I leapt over boulders and easily skirted around debris.
Approximate distance to Fauna, 2 kilometers south.
South was directly behind me. I kept up my pace, my breath fogging up my visor. I rounded bends and ducked under low arches, my footfalls thundering over my heartbeat.
Approximate distance to Fauna, 1 kilometer south.
The scenery sped by in a blur of white and gray, the snow from above me melting instantly as it made contact with the warmth of my visor. I wasn't thinking anymore, I was just running, blindly following the line on the map. A second tonal vibration sounded, the force of it using my momentum against me. The pathway heaved, throwing me onto the ashen ground. I slid forward a few feet, vaguely aware of the sound of something tearing. I laid on my stomach for a moment as the vibration continued. That single moment of rest was all I gave myself before hoisting myself up onto my hands and knees, my boots scraping against the slippery surface beneath me, just as my health monitoring systems kicked in.
Warning, rapid depressurization. Warning, loss of oxygen imminent.
The system repeated the notification over and over again, audibly and visually at the center of my visor display, but I couldn't do anything about it. Somewhere, my suit had been torn and my oxygen supply was leaching out. I had no time left to worry about it. I needed to be back in the elevator now. I managed to right myself, getting back onto my feet as the intensity of the sound of the vibration picked up. Without hesitating further, I broke into a sprint. My ears felt full, like the sound was coming from inside of my own head. The buildings quaked as large bits of roof and wall and pillar came loose, crashing to the ground around me as I ran past. I dodged the bigger ones whilst using my forearms to block the smaller ones from damaging my visor. My display began to malfunction, the screen filling with large sections of pixels obscuring my view. The speakers within my helmet began to play the sound of static, clipping in and out. Occasionally, a few high-pitched notes would sound before the static returned. The warning notification didn't stop, though it grew more and more distorted as it continued on. My breath scraped down my throat, each one more painful than the last. My lungs burning as I inhaled dust and whatever else toxins were present down there. The garbled, almost incoherent voice of the notification system sounded as I dashed around a corner. I could see the light of the entry of the cavern in the near distance.
Approximate distance to fauna, 350 meters south.
A piercing screech blared out of my helmet speakers as I approached the exit. By this point, my visor display was completely illegible with its interference.
Warning, oxygen levels at 40%.
I was so close to the exit now, I could see the looming brightness beyond the massive doors. I was almost there. I was a few feet behind the mouth of the doorways when the notification system coughed out one final update.
Approximate distance to fauna, 15 meters south.
The vibration intensified, the sound consuming everything. My displays died and my audio systems cut out. I couldn't hear anything, I just felt it. It was inside of my bones, inside of my cells. It was invading my body and tearing me apart. It forced me to my knees, just beyond the line where the light of the chamber met the darkness of the forgotten city. I dragged myself forward by my forearms, my gloved fingers reaching out to try and pull myself into the light. The sound pressed down on me as if attempting to merge my body with the earth. The pressure was immense. It was bearing down upon my back. It was rippling across my skin and biting into my flesh. It was forcing itself from my body in screams I hadn't realized I was letting out. A shadow, blacker than the expanse around me, descended over my fallen form. Tightness coiled around my left leg and yanked me backwards. My screams became audible over the unending sound as I watched my fingers sliding over the snow-covered terrain, feebly trying to grab hold of something, anything, to stop myself. The gloves I wore dug ruts into the snow, reminding me of how close I'd come to getting out. I began to kick with my free leg, using any and all remaining strength I had to try and free myself from whatever had a hold of me. My leg connected with something solid, and the tightness recoiled. The tone of the vibration shifted even lower, the sound no longer audible, but it was impossible to miss. Suddenly, I was upright and sprinting. I ran until I crossed the threshold of the doors, slamming straight into the elevator doors. Behind the thin metal bars of the elevator, I pressed the return button in rapid succession, briefly glancing at the open doorway as it began to haul me upwards. I couldn't see whatever it was because it was as black as the darkness from where it came. I did, however, see something. A mass, writhing in the shadows, its tendrils leaking out into the cold whiteness of the clearing. I understood now what those skeletons had been trying to do. I understood now that we had failed them. They died keeping those doors closed. And now, as I was being hoisted back to the surface, fear gripped me tightly as the entity had. Amongst all the unknowns surrounding the city, there was one truth. The doors of stone were open, and I had no idea what had been unleashed upon the world.
Thanks for watching, and before you go, here's a special shout out to my patrons who donated $20 or more: Tyler Spooks, Alice Gutierrez, Kura, and Simon Laverdier Delisle. Thanks so much, you guys. If you're interested in becoming a patron and helping me to keep YouTube creepy, please feel free to check out the link in the card.